Also, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about why a nationwide ban on texting while driving may actually be one of the dumber ideas that we've had in recent time. Now, I know that one alone is likely to get people slightly bent out of shape because it runs completely contrary to to conventional wisdom. Nobody in their right mind would ever advocate texting while driving. And yet, at the same time, I'm going to tell you that I don't think a blanket prohibition is in any way a good thing. But we'll get to that here in just a few moments. Let's talk a little bit about why it's in your interest to teach your kids the meaning of the Fourth Amendment. There's a fantastic article today. This is on the Foundation for Economic Education website, and it's by Rory Margraf. And he begins with a story about when he was a young man and was apparently working at the library. 16 years old, young kid, not necessarily knowledgeable about the ways of the world, but getting an education as he walks into the library one day. And he worked in this library and came in one day and smelled smoke. Notice there's firemen around, a number of firefighters there. It was his day off, so he wasn't wearing any badge or anything to indicate he was an employee of the library. And he says, I got this thin whiff of smoke, and as indicated by Ray Bradbury in the eternal Fahrenheit 451, he says, I watched for a few moments, just curious, then I went through the employee entrance to figure out what was going on. He wanted to speak with his employer about something totally unrelated. He said, seeing that his employer wasn't there, he asked a coworker about the commotion outside, but he didn't seem to know any of the details. So on returning to the lobby, he stepped closer to the library door to peer through and see if there was anything amiss. And there were guests inside who looked on with the same curiosity, but there was no panic. And he saw a firefighter entering the restroom and exiting the restroom, and then made the assumption that maybe something had been ignited inside, something like the toilet paper rolls that he'd found on fire earlier that year at his high school. Which he says a little water took care of that and he put it out. But noticing his curiosity, a large firefighter in uniform whom I assumed was in charge of the situation, he says, approached me. I hadn't noticed how close I'd actually gotten, and he quickly closed the gap. He started by asking who I was and what I was doing there at that moment. He says, I didn't give my name since the question didn't seem to ask for it, but I did tell him, well, I'm an employee of the library, and he says, I had come in to speak with my employer. And after those brief pleasantries, I was bluntly asked, did you start a fire in the restroom? Now his answer was no, sir. It was true, but criminals may possess the propensity to lie to officials in order to protect themselves. And arsonists have been known to return or sometimes stay at the scene of their crimes, which may be why the next question followed. Do you have a lighter or any matches on you? And he says, I didn't. So the answer was no, sir. And he says, this is where it became complicated. As I write this, I can only shake my head at my 16-year-old self. Can you empty your pockets for me? The answer was not, no, sir. He says, I nodded quickly and reached into my pockets as my heart pounded and my hands trembled, thinking I was in trouble for something I didn't do. I produced my wallet and a small pack of mints. He inspected them briefly in my cupped hands, then brushed me aside like a distraction. So at this point, Rory stepped outside, says, I took a couple of deep breaths to calm myself. I told myself he was doing his job and I did the right thing by complying. I have nothing to hide, I told myself, so there was nothing wrong with following orders. And he says, I sat on the steps and waited for my mother to pick me up. When she arrived, I told her the story, as I'm telling it now, only with a small smile on my face. I'd begun to think it was actually a little bit funny, almost cool in the manner in which the firefighter wielded his authority. But he says, my mother did not. While riding shotgun, he says, I was immediately scolded for emptying my pockets or answering a question at all without asking for a reason or without demanding the grounds upon which I must be searched, regardless of who was asking. I had every reason to be there, either as an employee or as a public citizen, and no one has the authority to question my mere presence and curiosity. To comply with orders that I had no reason to follow was unacceptable, my mother said. What if I had been carrying a lighter but hadn't started the fire? What would the consequences have been? And he says it was a fair point. While I didn't carry a lighter at 16, I do carry one at 28, more as a lucky charm than anything, but also as a source of fire if the need should arise. If I had not learned that lesson then, could I not make that mistake as an adult, happily complying while possibly implicating myself in a crime that had been committed? Well, he says, the lesson that my mother taught me has stayed with me. The words I uttered to myself that day are the same words that so many have uttered to justify stop and frisk, unlawful search and seizure, mass data collection, and warrantless surveillance. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But what of a sense of inflated authority? If we continue to comply, believing ourselves to be good citizens instead of defending our rights, would that not become the norm? An expectation of compliance rather than law under which we are protected from such actions becomes the norm until that sudden gentle resistance is regarded as crime. While I made a mistake that day, he says, my mother ensured that I would not make it again. Now he says, to add a laugh to an otherwise cautionary tale, I worked at the public library for about 4 months. I went through a very short interview process and a very long application process, including going to the county seat to sit in someone's cubicle for several hours while filling out paperwork I didn't understand. And he says, as it turns out, thanks to California's bloated public pension program, I'm still receiving the notices of the balance of my retirement fund, which had less than $3 in it by the time I returned to school. The compound interest will continue to collect till I reach retirement age, which might be enough to buy myself a nice dinner in 30-some-odd years. I thought this was a story worth sharing because this is a conversation that I have been having with my own kids. And you know, I got to tell you, my wife actually does not really like the fact that I'm having this conversation with my teenage sons. And I'm telling them, just because an adult tells you, empty your pockets for me, does not mean that you have to do so. And my oldest boy is asking, well, what about when I'm at school? What if they tell me you have to let us search your backpack? And I know school officials, it's like a prison in the sense that, well, if you're here, you have consented just by being here to not having any, protection from being searched. You see that on military installations too. But at least in prisons and military installations, you can almost understand, why they're trying to keep weapons or other contraband out of there. School, I think it's more of a control thing. But the bottom line is, I have given my son my copy of a book called You and the Police. It's written by a writer by the name of Kenneth W. Royce. He writes under the pseudonym of Boston Tea Party. And it's a remarkable book in that it will walk you through all the different levels of interaction with the police, from contact to detention to arrest, just so you can understand what's going on. He explains the difference between an officer having what's called reasonable articulable suspicion versus having probable cause. And if an officer has probable cause, he's not going to ask you for permission to search because there is some kind of evidence that he believes is enough to connect you to a crime or potentially connect you to a crime. If the officer's asking you, do you mind if I take a look through your vehicle? My son has learned that the answer is, I never consent to a search. And I want you to understand, I'm not teaching him to be anti-authority, and I'm not teaching him to be hateful towards those who are acting under the state's authority. What I'm trying to teach him is the importance of understanding that he has God-given rights that he has to exercise, or they will go away. Just like Rory says in his article here about if it's not exercised, or if you don't say something, it becomes the norm. Instead of defending our rights, you simply become, you allow it to become the norm where, well, it'll be like the TSA at the airport. That's the new normal. Whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, that's where we are today. So I don't know what your thoughts are. This is one of a number of different topics we could address when we come back from the break here. But I really believe that this is one of the most important conversations we can have with our kids today. And that is understanding what their rights are, understanding how to say no to someone in authority. And I totally understand how subversive that sounds to some people. It sounds like, Bryan, you are raising a bunch of anti-government extremists. And that's because we're taught from a very early age that, hey, government is there to make our lives better and protect us from the wolves out there in the world, and therefore it is in our interest not only to obey without question, but to actually treat the questioner as a hero as long as they're in a uniform. But there is that matter of our inalienable rights. So I'm curious if any of you have had a similar conversation with your kids. I want my kids to respect the rule of law, but when the state is behaving in a lawless manner, particularly if it's, wanting to do things without probable cause, somebody's got to be willing to say no. We'll be back after this.
The sun's finally out, so get out there and enjoy.
All right, I will get to
Refreshing sound.
I'll get to Randy here in just a moment.
1640
Hello, Patty. Hello, Peg.
Has healthcare become too much of a burden? If so,
What do you think of this guy?
there is a way out. Open enrollment is here.
Blanket
This is
prohibition
your
on
chance
marijuana.
to
I'll be
make
interested to hear what he has to say.
something new and more
Because he
innovative
used
and
your wording,
cost-effective.
obviously, on the blanket
Liberty
prohibition,
Healthcare
but
is a
I thought he was
healthcare
going to talk about the
nonprofit
Fourth
that's taking
Amendment,
the
but
nation by storm and
he
bringing
actually
freedom back
cited
to
the ad.
healthcare world. If
You know, the
are
ad,
ready
the
to
Prop 2
take
ad.
control of your healthcare,
Oh, let's do that.
Liberty Healthcare, 855-585-4237. That's 855-585-4237.
This is the cop that killed that guy in the hallway at that hotel down in Arizona
I think I saw
a
that
couple
video.
years ago. That was absolutely ridiculous.
Use of power?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember.
Well, the guy is scared out of his mind, trying to crawl on his hands and knees, and it wasn't this guy who was barking contradictory orders at him. It was a supervisor, and the supervisor was so amped up. Friends of mine who are cops watched that video, and they said, "Oh, I could tell from the tone of the dude's voice somebody was going to die." That's how amped up the cop was who was shouting the commands at him.
The sad part is like his face looks familiar, so I've probably seen the video, but there's so many that it's like, which one? Hang on, let me go through my library.
And he had the dust cover on his AR-15. He had the word stenciled there on his rifle. "You're effed," which played, not so well with the jury, but.
Sounds like a troop, like a military guy.
Yeah, well, look at those tribal tattoos everywhere. That's Officer 82nd Airborne right there. I think he was involved in another shooting too, if I'm not mistaken.
His face looks familiar.
But this is him as a missionary.
Oh shoot.
Here he was saving souls, and here he was creating them.
But
Man,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's crazy. It's definitely an issue.
Yeah.
The one that and thankfully nothing happened on that one, but you remember the one that I pointed out to you, or you saw it as well, with the cop, and he's like trying to get the confession with the kid and with the weed on the car, and he's just like, my hands are up, gave you my ID, go running. He's like, I'm not moving from this car. It's like, oh God, I hate when
So what are they trained to do in that case?
the
Escalate.
oh gosh, no, and like I said, I think I told you that too. The comment on this in this comment section just really caught my attention. He's like, your friend's kind of making me think he has a gun, and they're like, in the comments, they're like, he's establishing cause to kill you right there.
Yes.
And I never think about that, and I'm just like, oh my God, he really is like. By saying that I think he has a gun, you can, on the police video footage later, be like, he had it, I saw it, he was reaching for it, and the video is supposed to clear things up, but sometimes it doesn't.
Scary. All right, let's see what Randy's got on his mind.
Yeah.
Gulp.
Let's see.
Welcome back to Loving Liberty. I'm Bryan Hyde. Mo is my producer in studio today and taking your calls at 801-254-1640. Let's get right to the phone. Randy, thanks for your patience and welcome to Loving Liberty.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Well, I call in when you start talking about blanket prohibition, and I'm seeing that something that we're breaking away from in this country, but seems like the state of Utah, based on the commercial I heard on the break before this one, they're spouting out a bunch of things that I don't think are quite accurate. And this medical marijuana initiative that's going on, where do you stand on that? What do you think?
Those are some cards I've been keeping pretty close to my chest. So I'll just tell you that I am in favor of more, not less freedom, and you can draw your own conclusions from there.
I agree with you in that respect of things, and that's.
Where do you stand on it?
I was just looking at a website that's put out by a group called NORML, the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, and they have a section in there about what's going on here in Utah. And they had a listing of different groups that the student associations have for the different colleges in the state. And all the colleges in the state and universities were represented except for two that I found something. I'm trying to figure it out and thinking maybe you might be able to put something in on this. The university in Cedar City and the college in St. George, they weren't there.
Dixie and SUU.
And what was the issue?
Well, these were groups that were getting students registered to vote, so they're promoting the idea that medical marijuana should be something that's available to the sick and people that can, if they can find a use for this, it shouldn't have to be controlled by big pharma and the folks that are trying to push this stuff for a profit motive, basically. This is my opinion, but.
You know, I think most of us, since we weren't around in 1900 or 1910, we don't remember that prior to 1914, anybody could walk in off the street to a drugstore and without a prescription, they could purchase a bottle of codeine cough syrup, or they could get tincture of opium, they could get laudanum, they could get heroin, they could get cocaine, they could get cannabis.
That's right.
Without a prescription. In other words, those were not regulated by the FDA, and the government did not make it its business to tell people you can have this, you can't have that. That all came incrementally as a result of the progressive era of politics, where government slowly started expanding its control over more and more areas of our lives. Now, here's the question I have: if that really was the death knell of civilization, how did we ever tame a continent under those conditions? I mean, certainly there were people who got hooked.
The Constitution is written on
hemp paper.
Hemp paper, that's right.
Cannabis plant.
No, they all grew it on their plantations for writing. But
No, it's the point being, though, that was something, that was a decision that was left up to the citizenry in those days, and somehow our civilization not only survived but actually thrived, and I would argue was on its way to true greatness up until the early part of the 20th century, and then the New Deal and everything coming along, and government started growing like a cancer.
That's been my contention all along. I had some missionaries come and try and talk to me a few days ago, and the basic thing that I couldn't get around was the idea that somebody would want to take my free agency from me, when that is what they're trying to tell me that they promote more than anything, but yet they're backing this prohibition, and the two just are not, they don't mesh for me.
Yeah, freedom is a scary thing, and unfortunately, there are those who are so afraid of what a little bit of freedom might do for people who are legitimately sick and could benefit from a naturally occurring substance, under the direction of their medical professional, but they don't want to even give that.
It's been used for 10,000 years as medicine. I think it has a proven track record.
All I know is...
finding out even more. But see, what's going on here is there are those that are trying to corner the market on it and patent it. See, because I'm finding that while we're prohibiting, places like Israel are not prohibiting it. They're studying it, they're finding uses, they're developing new medicines from it, and the patents are flowing freely.
You are correct.
And you're going to pay like this Shkreli guy that was wanting to charge for an EpiPen like $5,000 or something.
Yeah.
When they used to cost like $20. This is the type of situation you're looking at when these people get the patents and hold your life in their hands.
What you're describing, that resistance to anything not being regulated by the state, that is the creed of statism. If it's not being directly controlled, and in this case strictly regulated by the state, it's considered out of control. And that's a mindset that has been programmed into the American populace over a very long time. But boy, has it taken hold, because some of the strongest proponents of that mindset are people who ostensibly stand for freedom. They stand for limited government. Why, yes, I want more liberty. I want more freedom, except when I disagree.
God inspired our Constitution, yet we have to have people telling us every move to make. Thanks for the time.
Okay, thanks, Randy. This is I know it's a very divisive issue right now, particularly in the state of Utah, where this question is actually going to the voters. And if there was ever a time to do your own homework, in other words, read the actual initiative and pay very close attention to who is using fear to try to steer you one direction or the other. Anytime someone is trying to make you scared, that's a pretty sure sign that someone's trying to hack your brain. And it's a good time to ask the question, why? Why would they need to hack my brain if reason and logic is on their side? So that's probably about as far as I'm willing to stick my neck out. But Ray, welcome to Loving Liberty.
Yes, Randy and I respectfully disagree on some issues, and I'm not sure if we do on this one, though. To me, the number one problem is that it's a Schedule 1 with the federal government. To me...
Oh, we lost you. There we go. Go ahead. Say that again. You say it's a Schedule 1, and the government...
Yes, the federal government, it should be a Schedule 2. And now, I don't think a lot of people realize this, that right now in Utah, I just bought some hemp oil. And right down there at a store in Salt Lake, and the hemp oil, it's not illegal, and it's got the same thing that fish oil has in it. People say they use it for digestion, for the oils that's in there, and they say they do it for pain. Like they say it works better than aspirin and Excedrin.
And isn't CBD is legal here? Just I think we could get it prescribed for epilepsy.
In some forms, yeah.
Of it for now.
Although I have heard personally of stores that were selling CBD oil who were approached not by law enforcement but by the state division of professional licensing, who wanted to come in and take their inventory because they were saying they weren't properly licensed for it. So there's a real desire for control there. And again, I'm not a physician. I don't think you have to be a physician to understand that there are some herbal remedies that really do have a therapeutic benefit. I think this is something that needs to be left between patients and their doctors, and the state, when it gets involved, unfortunately, tends to err on the side of overkill, which unfortunately leaves people who are legitimately suffering in a very bad position. In the meantime, the people who want to recreationally go out there and burn out their brain cells, hey, just go to your nearest high school, and I'm sure somebody could hook you up. It's working really well, that whole prohibition thing. Anyway, thanks, Ray. We'll be back after this.
Treading on thin ice here, huh?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm going to go to the texting while driving thing, since I know that will surely make someone.
Someone's proposing that we eliminate it entirely, like you're not allowed to text. Period. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, nationally.
Anywhere, at any time. Or is it just driving?
Just while driving. But here's the thing: that only would apply on like military installations, Indian reservations, and other like national parks or things like that.
Why do you say that?
Because those are actual federal controlled roads.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They build the interstates, or they finance the building of the interstates, but you know how they got the states to enact all the seatbelt laws and to raise the drinking age?
Right.
Will withhold federal highway funds. That's the carrot and the stick. So
no, you're right. Like I don't think anybody's anyone's gonna speak out and say you texting and driving is okay. But
not in every circumstance, but I'll try to make the case that there are times where it's not the wrong thing to do. You're stuck in standstill traffic and you're late for a meeting. Why not text your boss, hey, I'm getting there as quick as I can, but I got caught in traffic.
Plus you could do your little voice text.
Yeah. You know, or if you're...
And I'm not gonna lie. When we're at, if I'm at a signal light, or like, you know, when you're on the on-ramp waiting to get on the freeway, it's like, all right, I'm on my way. Like I sent my text to my friends, hey, I'm on my way now. Like I'm getting on. So like, and I think everybody is, especially at a signal light stop sign or something.
Driving down I-15 in rush hour traffic, that is not the time to be texting. But common sense, you know, makes that plain.
Businesses and nonprofits. Planning, contracts, and employment issues. We also handle what we call life law matters. These are those cases that arise just by living life, buying a home, rental agreements, power of attorneys, and traffic and DUI matters. We have 5 offices in Orem, Ogden, Salt Lake City, Sandy,
I'll be back. You can't keep the Democrats out of the White House forever. And when they get in, I'm back on the streets with all my criminal buddies.
Sideshow Bob. Yay.
Peace Legal. We're a refreshingly different type of law firm.
Hey, this is Stan Ellsworth. Believe it or not, I wrote a book. Yeah, man, it's about the heroes of the American Revolution. Kind of like the motorcycle culture, same mindset. You can get yours on Amazon today. So, man, get your Patriot on. Let your spirit of 76 shine loud and proud, baby. Get you some. Renegades and Rebels. That's us, man.
All right.
Our rights come from God, not from government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your health care? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their health care. Freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your health care, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty Health Share and take back the control of your health care while helping those around you. Call us at 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or check us out online at libertyhealthshare.org. That's libertyhealthshare.org.
All right. Welcome back to Loving Liberty. I'm Bryan Hyde. Thanks so much for joining us today. All right, the show just gets more interesting as the day goes on. Let's talk about texting and driving. Oh, you want to talk about a subject that will trigger people. This is the one. And I'm bringing this up because I saw an article that was published last week, ban on texting while driving. No. This was published on the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and apparently there is talk of a nationwide ban on texting while driving. Now, to many, the obvious answer is, yeah, you know, there ought to be a ban, but